I'd like to talk about attaching the tool to the auger drive and some of the things to be concerned about there. Number one, the pin that we use to do the attachment. It must be a grade 8 pin. You're going to have one included with your package. Make sure if you have to replace it that you do use a grade 8 3/4 inch. And inspect this pin before every use and periodically throughout the day. It does take a lot of abuse, mainly picking up the donuts out of the road. The frame and lid with the road overcut is going to put a lot of stress on this. And also when you're cutting concrete or hard materials, it gets a lot of banging, so you may experience some cracking, breaking, bending of this pin. And don't expect to get 1,000 cuts out of a pin. You're going to have a few extra ones around and replace them periodically. Also, let's talk about the welds. I want you to inspect these daily and even more frequently than that throughout the day while you're doing your cutting. There's a lot of impact loading on these welds, and if they start to crack, you'll see that before any damage is done, and you want to make sure you get that repaired. Just keep a close eye on that. Also, the bolts that attach this top assembly to the carrier disc, you want to make sure that they're torqued down to 200 foot-pounds and check them periodically. While they do have nylock retaining nuts on them, they may vibrate loose, and if they do, they can start to do damage to the carrier. So check those frequently to make sure they stay tight. Let's talk about the bottom guide shaft assembly. Number one, you'll notice that there's a rubber isolation damper installed between the assembly and the carrier disc. We want to make sure that that remains in good shape. It's very important to absorb impacts. We also want to make sure that these bolts that hold this assembly to the carrier disc are kept torqued to 125 foot-pounds. It's very important. Inspect those frequently. There's a bolt right here. It's a grade 8 bolt, and it holds the guide shaft to the guide shaft assembly. If this needs to be replaced, you'll be removing that bolt. Make sure that bolt stays tight. Torque it to 125 pounds and keep it that way. Inspect it frequently. Inspect the shaft for any damage, cracking. This shaft takes all the lateral pressures of the machine as it's cutting. Make sure it stays in good shape. If you need to replace it, there are replacement shafts available, and it is replaced by removing that one bolt. Also, the key assembly is held in by an Allen screw right here in this hole. If at any time you remove this, say it wears and you want to replace it, or you want to take it out for use with the Mr. Valve system and you put it back in, you want to make sure that you put blue Loctite on that Allen key when you put it back in, and check this frequently to make sure that the Allen key's tight and that this isn't moving back and forth. This represents the end of the cutter extractor's shaft, which has a key. As you can see, there's a key-shaped hole in the speed plate. To put this through that hole, the keys have to be lined up and it goes through. The only way it can come back out is if it's aligned like that. If you turn it, go through and turn it sideways, it will not come out because the keys keep it from coming out. So we would use that function to pull the casting and overcut out, and then when we want to release, we'll rotate slowly, and when the keys line up, out the shaft comes. So that's how the speed plate and the cutter extractor shaft work together to pull the manhole frames out of the road.